When it comes to the most evil people in the world, I think what comes to mind most of the times for some people are the likes of Hitler, Mao Zedong, Katerina the Great of Russia. You can also include Idi Amin. You can also put in that basket King Henry VIII of Britain. There's also Saladin. But when we center that to the African perspective, I think the most evil person was King Leopold, or is King Leopold II of Belgium. So King Leopold II was born in Belgium, that's in Brussels, in 1835. He was the second child of King Leopold I, who was the first king of Belgium after it gained independence from the Netherlands. So King Leopold II became king in 1865. That is after succeeding from his father. And when you look at the period when Leopold II became king, that was also the same time that most countries in Europe were shunning away from having rulership from a monarch. So the power now in that particular case lay in the hands of the government. So you find that most monarchs had very little power, because that meant that most power was stripped off, and so they had very little power, very little influence in the affairs of the country. Now when Leopold II became king, he just didn't want to have, like that very little power. He wanted to be an influential man in the affairs of the country. He wanted to have power. He wanted to own even land, especially some colonies, because remember, during the 19th century, which is in the 1800s, that was the period when most of the European powers were engaged in colonial activities. So he also wanted that as well. Now, you look at Belgium, it's a country that has just gained independence, because remember, his father was the first king. So at that time, the country was still weak. It also had no navy, no army. So that kind of limited King Leopold in his, ambitions. But that did not kind of stop Leopold. But then what do I mean when I say King Leopold is the most evil person when we center him to Africa? So you find that King Leopold was the only person and only king and an individual who actually owned a personal colony during the colonial era. When you look at the likes of Britain had colonies, but those were owned as Britain. France had some colonies, but they had them as France, as a country. Now Leopold owned a personal private colony, not as Belgium, but as King Leopold. So that land became his personal property. And this land we are talking about is the current Democratic Republic of Congo. Now, the question that would come now to mind would be, how did Leopold manage to obtain that territory? Probably I would attribute that to, his upbringing. Because when you look at his upbringing, he had a very strict upbringing. And apart from it being strict, he had a very disciplined and formal upbringing. And that was all coming from, the values that the father believed in. King Leopold never had a personal relationship, the father-son kind of relation with his father. It was all strict, it was all disciplined, formal kind of relation. So I would think that also contributed, because then he became this, ambitious kind of man. Not that if you don't have a personal relationship, you can't be ambitious. No, that's not what I meant, but that in some way contributed, because his focus now was just on, having power, having influence and money, and that was it. Then when you also look at his education that he had, is that he had a lot of training, or he received education in classical languages. And when we talk of classical languages, these languages such as Latin and Greek. So he also underwent training in those languages. He also underwent training in history and geography, did mathematics, he also did religion and ethics, he also did French and Germany. But when you look at French and Germany, these were like the official languages of Belgium. And of course, being the heir to the throne, he also underwent law and constitutional monarchy. He also underwent diplomacy and international affairs. He also underwent some training in the royal etiquette and administration. And I believe all these kind of contributed to him having the ability to easily obtain land as a private colony, you know. And I would also include in that basket, you know, because Leopold loved to travel. But then his travelings were not just, you know, I love to travel and so on. No, he traveled to explore, to see what is ongoing, what are the people doing, you know. So he traveled mostly in Europe, especially in admiring the countries such as Britain, because remember, Britain then was a superpower. So he traveled in Britain and France, just trying to admire and you know, calculating and learning how these countries are able to acquire a colony in Africa. Because remember, his country was still small, still struggling, with no ability to participate in these colonial activities. So he also traveled in the Mediterranean. He also traveled in the northern part of Africa, precisely in Egypt, you know, just trying to learn what you know, the other people are doing in other parts of the world. So probably I feel that also contributed to you know, to having the ability to obtain that particular land. Yeah. And you also find that King Leopold was a very confident person. Yeah, he was a very confident person. He was a con man, I may say. He was very manipulative, and he offered a lot of bribery, a lot of bribes to the people. And yeah, so that also, because he was very outspoken, so that gave him the ability to easily maneuver through the authorities that be and obtain the land in Africa. And he also held conferences. And at these conferences, he invited, you know, very important people. He invited explorers, he invited geographers, so that he could learn from these individuals on what is going on around the world, especially on the explorers. Because from the explorers is when he got to learn about the land in Africa. The current Democratic Republic of Congo was from the explorers. And one of the key persons that he invited at some of these conferences was Henry Morton Stanley. And remember, Henry Morton Stanley explored the most central part of Africa. And we know that he's the one who, together with David Livingstone, I think, explored in the southern part, but Henry Morton Stanley in the central part of Africa. And at these conferences, he at one of the conferences that was held in 1876, he came up with an association which he's calling the International African Association. And the aim of that association was to civilize Africa, as you know, as they want to put it. But was Africa uncivilized? At that point, it's how you want to define civilization. Because I feel we were civilized then. It's just how you define civilization. There's European civilization, there's African civilization. Everybody was civilized. But then, of course, if they want to call it civilization, European civilization, yeah, let's call it that. So his aim in that association was to civilize Africa, to spread Christianity, and also to kind of improve the economy of the African people. So he presented that association, and of course that interested the people that attended that conference. So like I mentioned, one of the key persons at the conference was Henry Morton Stanley, and he engaged, that is King Leopold now engaged Henry Morton Stanley to become his administrator of that particular land in the central part of Africa. So in becoming his administrator, they had to coin up treaties, and in those treaties, what was in the treaties was all about the interests of King Leopold II. So they came up with all those treaties highlighting what the interests of Leopold were. And Henry Morton Stanley had to be the one to take those treaties to the chiefs of the Congo Kingdom. Remember, the Congo Kingdom was in the central part of Africa, in the current Democratic Republic of Congo. So he's the one who took down, because he became the administrator of King Leopold II. So he went down, and remember, the treaties were all written in French, and the people, the chiefs in that area, did not understand that particular language. So they just didn't understand the affairs of Europe. They understood the African way of life. So these treaties were written in French, and they did not understand the French language. But Henry Morton Stanley had to interpret what was in the treaties, but what he interpreted was not what was in the treaties. So he interpreted to say, no, the treaty is all about, bringing this civilization, European civilization, to the people of Africa, improving the economy. We also want to spread Christianity. Those were the good things. Which king whose interest is all about the people wouldn't actually agree to that? So they quickly signed the treaties, and some of the chiefs that Henry Morton Stanley met were we've got Ngalema, who was the chief in the western part of Kinshasa today, and he also met the chief of the Makoko chief, who was, I may say, his land was located near the northern part of the Congo River Basin, and he also signed some chiefs with the Bakongo and the Bangala chiefs, who were in the, just along the Congo River. Then he also signed some treaties with the Luki and the Ititsi chiefs, who were located in the lower parts of the Congo River. Now, in exchange for all of that, Henry Morton Stanley also brought, some gifts to the chiefs, and these were mainly guns and some clothes, some knives, and knives were a very important cultural aspect in the African culture. So I think they had learned it through these explorations. So they also presented some knives, and they also presented some what I can call trinkets, which just a small, a gift that has no value, but then it's presented as if it's something special. And it could be anything, such as probably just an empty bottle, but then just wrapped and cutely done. And of course the people rejoiced and they celebrated, because every little gift, I think, according to the African perspective, is great. So they received those little, nonsensical gifts from, Henry. And so that is how he managed to get. Now, so he signed all these treaties with the chiefs of the Congo Kingdom. And When you look at during the 1884 to 1885, which we are calling the Berlin Conference, when people sat at the Berlin Conference table to divide, in which we are calling the Scramble for Africa, where the European powers sat down in Germany and divided Africa. Of course, the meeting was chaired by Bismarck, and at the meeting there was the President of the United States, that's Arthur, who attended. And then there was also the Prime Minister, I think, of Britain, was Gladstone, also attended. The President of France, I think, was something like Gravy or something like that. That was his name. So all these key players, and Germany, of course, being the chair of that meeting, chaired by Bismarck, attended. And Leopold also presented himself on an individual capacity, not representing Belgium, but representing himself. So he attended that conference. And at that conference, he presented his association, the International African Association, which he presented the aim of that association. And now he also presented the treaties that were signed, giving him the authority by the local chiefs in the Congo Kingdom, giving him the authority to have ownership and governing of that particular land. So when at the table for the Scramble for Africa, when he presented those treaties, the people couldn't resist, because the chiefs down there have allowed him through these treaties, and his aims are also kind of interesting. Civilize Africa and bring economy and spread Christianity. So there were all these nice stuff that he had coined up, and the great powers at the table had to allow him to say, no, this person mean well for the people of Africa. So they gave him that particular piece of land by the end of the meeting. That was in 1885, and he named that region, which was the Congo Kingdom, as the Congo Free State. Now, when you look at what he meant by Congo Free State, it was also just a manipulative name he gave it to show the people, no, I want Congo to be free. Because of course, during that time, when the Europeans were arriving in Africa, there was the Arabs already, and the Arabs were involved in slave trade. So when he gave Congo that name, the Congo Free State, his aim was also, to end slave trade, which was already existing as a result of activities by the Arabs. So when people saw that, no, this man means well, and so on. And of course, there goes Leopold with, a property of his own, a colony. And when you look at Congo, that's a big piece of land being owned by one particular individual. That's why I'm saying he was a very big con man, but there he was. He managed to get the land, and so he went down. He himself never went down. He just governed this whole land through his administrator, who was Henry, and he also formed an army which he called the Force Public. So the army was also based down there. Now, when you look at the army, I think the army comprised of, 19,000 soldiers. But then that was a combination of African descent men, and Belgian officers. Now, when he began ruling or governing the renamed Congo Free State, that was the time when the world, especially Europe, was undergoing the Industrial Revolution. Of course, the Industrial Revolution began in the 1700 all the way to, I think, the 1900 to the 2000 as well. So that was the period of Industrial Revolution, and the Industrial Revolution was a period when we are moving from working with hands to using machinery. So what I mean is there was a lot of inventions of technologies to improve the lives of people in terms of agriculture, in terms of movement, transportation, that is in terms of production. So we were moving from that. So it was the time Now, during the same Industrial Revolution, I've said there were a lot of inventions that were taking place. Now, you find that all these machineries that are being manufactured, they obviously needed minerals. And one of the key minerals that rose up was rubber and a bit of, iron. No, ivory, yeah. So it became, a business. These inventors or these manufacturers needing a lot of rubber, needing a lot of iron, and so on. So in the Congo Free State that Leopold had occupied had a lot of rubber in there and also a bit of ivory. So he saw a business opportunity in supplying the rubber to the companies that were needing these raw materials in manufacturing whatever was needed. Remember, that was the period when vehicles were now being manufactured to be used as a mode of transport. There was also telephones that came about. There was also a lot of machinery to do with agriculture. Now, when you look at all these machines, needed a lot of rubber, and where Leopold was centered was a place of a lot of rubber. So he had no means to meet the demands of the company in rubber. So what he did, remember, he had formed an army which he called the Force Public. So he began using that army, and with that army he started going down to the villages in that Congo Free State. He would go to the army would go down to the villages because he used the army. So the armies would go down to the villages and hold the people in that particular village hostage. And when they hold them hostage, they were targeting mainly the women and children. So the women would be held hostage by this army. The men of the village in that particular case were forced to go and acquire this rubber from the forest. And they were given a particular quota to meet. And if you do not meet that particular quota, meaning your women, your children will be either killed or they will have their limbs amputated. And all those things were taking place. Now, you'll find that the Industrial Revolution is not a period that lasted. It's a period that lasted for a very long time. So there was demand for rubber for quite a long time. So now, how do the people, because once you acquire rubber at that particular place in this area, tomorrow you'll not find it, meaning you have to go an extra mile and find it. So it became very difficult now in meeting up some of the quotas that Leopold had put up. So people had difficulties in acquiring that rubber, and if they don't meet, he didn't care what. They had to just meet whatever demand rubber he needed. And if not, like I've said, the women will be killed, the children will be killed as well. Now, also to give us an example, because you remember, he moved from this village to the next. So if he's done with this village, probably the whole village destroyed because the men couldn't meet, so all their children are gone, or their women are also gone. And so he will also take, the amputated limbs and so on in a basket. The armies will take these in a basket and take to the next village and present to the people. So this is what I want. You have to meet such and such quotas of rubber, and if you don't, look what I've done from the village where I'm from. So that now brought in fear for the people, trying to meet these demands by Leopold, and you find that the people suffered. He killed them, and apart from being killed, they just suffered from, starvation, from illnesses that on a normal daily basis they would survive from. But because they were they were subjected to work under these harsh conditions, they couldn't survive. So he killed in whichever village he went, and amputated the limbs, and there was a lot of massacre, there was a lot of brutality. And yeah, so a lot of people died in the Congo region, and the soldiers, what they were told to do, if they killed, they were told not to waste bullets. So if they used a particular bullet and missed, they must have something to show that my bullet was not wasted. So if I was given 20 bullets in that gun, I must show what I did with those 10 bullets. Meaning I must show, is it 10 people I have killed? Because probably they did not meet the rubber demand. I must show some evidence that these bullets that you gave me actually didn't go for waste. So there was a lot that King Leopold did. And he destroyed the whole culture of that particular region. People starved, people died of illnesses, died of harsh conditions, because even those who went to get rubber, it wasn't as easy as A, B, C, D. They also went because they had to go in the deep forest, and it was also dangerous, So yeah, a lot of people died. Now remember, this whole the brutalities or the atrocities of Leopold lasted about 23 years. Now, how did he manage to hide the brutalities that he was subjecting the Congo Free State to? How did he manage to hide all of that? So you find that back in Belgium, in Brussels, he had created what he called the human zoo. So in that human zoo, he created a village. He got about 267 Congo people to go and live in that village. So they were given everything. They were living a merry life, farming, dancing, the normal African culture. And he invited people across Europe to go and, see how actually the people in the Congo that Leopold is owning are living, So he was trying to portray like, this is what I'm doing. This is how the people down there are living. They are all living a merry life and so on. So he kept on that for 23 years. But then, everything must come to an end. So remember, there were a lot of missionaries that were coming in and going and so on. So they also discovered all these brutalities, and of course other journalists discovered all these atrocities by King Leopold in the Congo Kingdom, and news spread all over Europe, and Belgium was now forced to grab the colony from King Leopold, and that is how he grabbed it. That was now in 1908. Remember, he ruled it from the time he obtained it at the Berlin Conference table in 1885 to 1908. So after that, the Congo Kingdom or the Congo Free State was in the hands of Belgium from 1908 to 1960, when they gained independence. But even during the period when the Congo Free State was governed by, the country Belgium itself, I wouldn't say that everything, went to being great for the people, because it's like they also continued, but in a better way, but they still continued with the way Leopold governed that particular region. So Congo has suffered from the atrocities of Leopold, such that when they gained independence in 1960, you would think that things now would become better. It hasn't been all that great for Congo up to today, because even when Joseph Kasavubu became president, he became president without even knowing how to govern the country, but that is observable in most African countries when they gained independence. So he obtained this particular, he became president in a country that was suffering. They had suffered all this from Leopold, and also the Belgian government as well. So yeah, so they suffered quite a lot such that even Joseph didn't even manage to do anything for his people, because even the time he governed, that was in 1960 to 1965, you find that there was also a lot of influence that was coming from the European superpowers, especially also from Belgium. So it's not like they governed their country on their own. They were still under the influence of the Belgians. Now, when they gained independence, the King of Belgium then, who was I've forgotten his name, but he gave a speech to in congratulation to the Congo Free State, and in his speech he talked about how colonialism was great for the African people, what it has done for the African people. Now there was the Prime Minister of Congo, of the I may say he was the Prime Minister of Congo, who was Patrice Lumumba. Remember, there was the President, who was Joseph Kasavubu. Then there was the Prime Minister. His role in that particular case was he was the head of the government. So he responded to the King of Belgium, and his response wasn't actually great. He highlighted, the negatives of colonialism, the negative impact that colonialism has brought on Africa, and that now didn't sit well with the European powers, such that after that particular speech that Patrice Lumumba gave, kind of brought instability among the European leaders. And from there now onwards, they ensured they observed, they ensured they checked what was going on. So they had Joseph Kasavubu and Patrice Lumumba as head of government. They had no much power in their rulership. And the European powers now ensured that they had influence even in the army, because remember, there was that army officer, Mobutu Sese Seko, who was like the army officer of the army. And still, when you look at Mobutu Sese Seko, he had a lot of influence from the Europeans. They controlled him, they supplied him with whatever he needed. Therefore, there was a lot of instability in the country, such that he also contributed to the conflicts that happened between Joseph Kasavubu and Patrice Lumumba, such that they began having some sort of conflict in the governance of the country. And then you find that in the following year, 1961, Patrice Lumumba was even killed. First of all, he was arrested by Mobutu Sese Seko, being the army officer of their army. So he was arrested and later assassinated by Mobutu Sese Seko, under the influence of the Europeans. So from there, Joseph Kasavubu continued governing, but even if he continued governing, there was Mobutu Sese Seko, who was the army officer, with a lot of powers that were coming from the Europeans. So even if Joseph led the country, he was just like a puppet of Mobutu Sese Seko, such that he couldn't govern it as the president. Everything, whatever Mobutu Sese Seko is what had to go through. And him also was getting a lot of influence from the Europeans. You find that Joseph Kasavubu governed the country from 1960 to 1965, in which at that point now Mobutu Sese Seko just took control of the country and became president of that particular country. So he also ruled it ruthlessly with a lot of dictatorship from 1965 onwards. He ruled it for about 3+ decades, and the people of Congo really suffered also through the hands of Mobutu Sese Seko, who became the president. And so Congo has never known peace. Congo has suffered. If there is a country that has really suffered mostly through the hands of colonialism, I would say is Congo, and these are things that we don't get to hear much about. I know probably the Congolese themselves, the Democratic Republic of Congo, knows their own history, but this is critical history that we have to know as the African people, and know the brutalities that existed in some of these parts of Africa. I know there are other regions where the other parts of Africa suffered also, but I wouldn't say they suffered as Congo has suffered, because even up to now, Congo is still suffering under the hands of the Europeans, because maybe due to a lot of minerals and whatever they have. But so they've suffered. They've never known peace. They've never known a stable. They've never lived as a stable country. So that is why I called Leopold as the most evil person when it comes to Africa.